In the heart of Charlotte's legal and financial world, Lucas Foster stood quietly at the intersection of ambition and betrayal. At 39, a successful financial consultant, Lucas had spent years building stability, not just for himself, but for the woman he loved. Veronica Foster, 37, a brilliant and ambitious lawyer, had clawed her way from paralegal to law firm owner, her eyes always on the next promotion, the next accolade, the next audience to impress. Their marriage of 8 years was a delicate balance of support and ambition, underpinned by Lucas's financial guarantees and quiet patience. Then there was James Wright, Lucas's trusted attorney, pragmatic and meticulous, married to Patricia Wright, a lawyer whose social ties and professional instincts connected her closely to Veronica's world. In that network of colleagues, rivals, and silent observers, every action, every signature, and every whispered word could ignite triumph or ruin. In this web of ambition, loyalty, and hidden power, the stage was set for a collision between love, betrayal, and the cold logic of revenge. The champagne flutes sparkled like tiny glass daggers under the chandelier light, catching every murmur of laughter, every calculated smile. The opening night of Veronica Foster's law firm wasn't just a celebration, it was her coronation. A room full of attorneys, partners, and freshly minted associates buzzed with ambition, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and professional rivalry. I stood at the edge of the room in my best charcoal suit, one I'd bought myself, not tailored in some boutique like the young lawyers around me. The champagne in my hand was from my own wallet too, not part of the catered spread. That detail mattered to me, even if no one else noticed. My name is Lucas. I'm 39. For 8 years, I've been Veronica's husband. For 8 years, I've been the quiet force underwriting her ambition. Tonight, she was about to repay me. Here's my starter husband. Time for the real thing. Her voice cut through the chatter like a scalpel, sharp, deliberate, practiced. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, glasses froze halfway to lips, and suddenly every eye in the room turned to me. 20-something lawyers in suits that cost more than my mortgage, older partners with faces sculpted by decades of courtroom theater, law school classmates who'd ascended the rungs of corporate law. All of them staring at me like I was a curiosity, an exhibit in some cruel museum of marital mistakes. Veronica smiled with that gracious, performative warmth she'd perfected in court. She raised her glass toward me like a queen acknowledging a loyal servant. Lucas has been such a good sport about supporting my career, she said, her tone dripping with faux gratitude. Co-signing loans, guaranteeing credit lines, making sure I could focus on what really mattered. I forced myself to stand still, though my grip tightened on the glass stem. I had been the bedrock, the one who believed, who signed, who paid. To hear it reduced to a punchline in front of this crowd was like being stabbed in slow motion. And then she pulled it out, the envelope. Cream paper, gold seal, theatric flair. The kind of gesture that could make a courtroom jury lean forward. But now that I'm established, she paused, savoring the tension. These are divorce papers. I think it's time I upgraded to someone more compatible with my new position. The silence was brief, 3 seconds, maybe less. Then came the ripple. A laugh here, a chuckle there. Someone actually clapped. Another voice whispered, just loud enough to reach me, brutal, but smart. No point dragging it out. Someone else, she's got guts. I respect that. My ears burned with their amusement, but my face betrayed nothing. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of shared bills, late-night encouragement, and signatures on dotted lines, reduced to spectacle. My humiliation was entertainment. Veronica pressed the envelope into my hands, her manicured fingers grazing mine with deliberate finality. Don't look so shocked, Lucas. You had to know this was coming. I mean, look around. She gestured broadly, as though the sleek furniture and catered trays justified everything. This is my world now. You were just transitional. The word echoed in my head, transitional. Like I was a bus stop, a waiting room, a disposable phase between where she was and where she wanted to be. I folded the envelope once, slid it into my jacket pocket, and turned toward the door. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Lucas, don't be dramatic, Veronica called after me, her tone light, dismissive, almost scolding. We can discuss the details later. Stay, have a drink. But I kept walking, my back straight, the murmurs following me like smoke. Every eye in the room drilled into my shoulders as I left, some gleaming with pity, others with admiration for Veronica's cruelty. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap. The city hummed with weekend life, traffic lights blinking red, horns echoing off glass towers, laughter spilling from rooftop bars. I stood on the curb for a long moment, envelope heavy in my pocket, chest tight but mind unnervingly calm. Humiliation fades. But power, that's permanent. And as I walked toward my truck, I realized Veronica might not fully understand what she had just thrown away. Something cold, something calculating began to take shape inside me. If she thought this was an ending, she was wrong. It was the opening argument. And I was about to write the closing statement. 8 years earlier, the story had been different. Veronica wasn't a woman in designer suits commanding a room of attorneys. She was a paralegal drowning in debt, her ambition outrunning her credit score. That night, in my kitchen, she sat at the table with her laptop open, loan applications spread across the wood like battle plans. Her eyes burned with that mixture of desperation and determination that could make a man feel like a savior just by saying yes. "Lucas," she had said, her voice soft but persuasive, "I just need someone to believe in me until I can believe in myself." I was already doing well in financial consulting then. My credit score sat pristine at 842, a number I carried like a quiet badge of honor. My business had steady clients, steady income, everything Veronica didn't. She had intelligence, grit, charm, but none of the collateral the banks demanded. Law school costs didn't bend for ambition. She reached for my hand across the table, her fingers trembling. "Once I graduate and establish myself, I'll refinance everything in my name. You'll be free and clear. Just temporarily." I believed her. More than that, I wanted to believe in her. I saw the potential she couldn't yet cash. And so, I signed. First came $68,000 in law school loans. My name was inked next to hers on the dotted line. Then another $15,000 for bar exam prep. When she decided to specialize with a Master of Laws, another $37,000. Each time, she promised, just until things stabilize. Each time, I nodded, reassured by her conviction. But the requests didn't stop when graduation gowns were returned. No, ambition had a wardrobe. "I need to look the part," she explained, holding up glossy brochures of tailored suits, Italian shoes, accessories that screamed success before she even opened her mouth in court. $25,000 secured on a professional wardrobe credit line, with my signature. Then came the technology package. High-end servers, research subscriptions, case management software, all the invisible machinery that made a modern law firm run. Another $40,000 guaranteed by me. The office lease. My guarantee. Professional liability insurance. My backing. Conference fees, continuing education courses, bar association dues, every essential was a line item on my spreadsheets. And those spreadsheets grew into a ledger of sacrifices. I tracked it all meticulously, not because I didn't trust her, but because that's how I worked. Columns of figures, neat rows of obligations. The total. $223,000 tied to my name. My reputation with the banks, my pristine credit, the shield she wore like armor in court. And through it all, I watched her evolve. She went from the woman who once whispered gratitude across my kitchen table to someone who barely mentioned my name at networking events. "My husband," she'd say vaguely, or later just, "This is Lucas." Her smile for me shrank as her smile for others grew wider. At first, I told myself it was stress. New cases, late nights, the weight of ambition. But then came the weekends away at conferences where spouses weren't invited. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The nights she came home smelling faintly of wine, laughter still clinging to her like perfume. The distance was incremental, like erosion. Not a landslide, but the slow, steady wearing away of rock until the foundation thinned. And yet, I kept signing. Each signature a vow, each number on the ledger a silent promise that I believed in her. Because isn't that what marriage is? Partnership. Investment in each other's future. I told myself that supporting her dreams was the same as supporting us. That every dollar was a brick in the house we were building together. But I was wrong. What I was building wasn't a house, it was a palace with my name buried in its foundation. A foundation she now believed she could abandon without consequence. The irony, of course, was financial. She, the lawyer who prided herself on fine print, never bothered to study the clauses in the contracts she asked me to sign. She didn't realize how fragile her empire was, how exposed she had left herself. And as I remembered those late nights at the kitchen table, her promises echoing in my ears, the humiliation at the cocktail party crystallized into something sharper. She thought I was transitional. But the truth. I had been the infrastructure. And when you pull out the infrastructure, the skyscraper comes crashing down. The collapse of a marriage doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't arrive with slammed doors and screaming matches, though I suppose some couples are granted that clarity. With Veronica and me, it was quieter. A steady erosion. Like water wearing away stone. It started small. One morning, I brewed coffee like I always did, 2 cups, hers with exactly 1 spoon of sugar. She took it without looking up from her laptop, muttered, "Thanks," and kept typing. No smile, no warmth, just mechanical acknowledgement. That was the first stone chipped away. Dinner became less about us and more about her phone, her calendar, her cases. She would sit across from me, fork hovering absent-mindedly over her plate while she scrolled through client emails. I'd ask, "How was your day?" and she'd answer with a clipped, "Busy." That one word became a wall. At first, I rationalized it. She was building a career, pushing through a cutthroat system. Ambition demanded sacrifice. I told myself this was temporary, that the Veronica I knew, the one who used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder, laughing at courtroom dramas on TV, would return once the storm passed. But the storm never passed. Weekends vanished into networking events I wasn't invited to. When I asked why, she'd say, "It's better if I go alone. Clients need to see me as independent, not tethered." Tethered, that was the word she used. As though being married to me was an anchor holding her back. Conversations shrank into transactions. She no longer asked how my consulting business was doing. No longer cared about the clients I advised, the deals I closed, the subtle art of turning risk into reward. My victories earned silence, her victories demanded applause. The bed was the last frontier. She started sleeping later and later, slipping under the sheets after I'd already closed my eyes. Some nights I'd wake and hear the faint click of her laptop in the living room at 2 a.m., light spilling under the doorframe. Other nights, she came home long past midnight, heels in her hand, perfume clinging to her like a second skin. When I asked, she said, "Drinks with colleagues." Don't be insecure, Lucas. That phrase stuck with me, don't be insecure. It wasn't an answer, it was a dismissal. And once someone dismisses you enough times, you start to notice patterns. The way her phone was always face down on the table. The way she lingered in the bathroom after texts came in. The way her laughter sounded softer, sweeter, when it wasn't directed at me. But she never admitted anything. That was her skill, plausible deniability, honed like a blade. She didn't need to confess when silence was just as sharp. Meanwhile, my ledger grew. Not just the financial one, though that sat in neat rows on my office computer, reminding me of every signature that tied me to her empire, but a second ledger, invisible. Every slight, every dismissal, every night alone was a mark in that book. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't beg. That's not my nature. I observed. I tracked. I let her believe she was pulling away unnoticed. Because sometimes, letting someone believe they're getting away with something is the first step in ensuring they don't. And so the marriage continued. Outwardly intact, inwardly hollow. She thought she was ascending. She thought she was replacing me with a future that shone brighter. What she didn't realize was that her ascent was still tied to the scaffolding I built. And scaffolding, by design, can be dismantled. By the time she stood in that cocktail party and handed me divorce papers like they were a trophy, she believed the erosion was complete, that I was already reduced to rubble. But she was wrong. Erosion can look like weakness. But erosion also reshapes the landscape, carves valleys, redirects rivers. What she mistook for collapse was simply redirection. And I was already planning where that river would flow. The night Veronica handed me those papers, the city seemed louder than usual. Neon lights bled into puddles, taxis honked like restless jurors, and the September air carried the heat of summer with the impatience of fall. I walked 3 blocks before I finally let myself breathe. My hand brushed against the envelope in my jacket pocket. Thick, heavy, yet meaningless. Divorce papers were just theater. A prop. She thought the performance ended with my humiliation. What she didn't know was that humiliation is a spark. Small, but capable of burning down everything it touches. I didn't go home. Not right away. Home was hers, after all, every lease, every utility bill tied to both our names, but ultimately hers in the way she claimed territory. I wasn't ready to sit in a space where her perfume still lingered, where her clothes hung like trophies in the closet. Instead, I walked into a bar. Not the kind Veronica would ever set foot in, no polished marble, no artisanal cocktails with rosemary sprigs. This was a dim joint with a jukebox in the corner, where whiskey came in short glasses without garnish. The bartender gave me a nod, poured without asking. I sat there, nursing the burn, and began pulling threads in my mind. Every loan, every guarantee, every dotted line with my signature. My ledger wasn't just a list of debts, it was a map. A map of choke points, vulnerabilities, fulcrums. She thought she'd outgrown me, but what she didn't realize was how tightly her empire was still tethered to mine. Credit lines. In my name. Office lease. Backed by my financial guarantees. Insurance premiums. Still routed through accounts I controlled. Even her wardrobe card, the one she flaunted like armor, was built on my credit foundation. Without me, Veronica Foster, Esquire, wasn't a fortress. She was scaffolding wrapped around empty air. I took out my phone, opened the banking app, and stared at the accounts. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like her sponsor, her financier, her silent partner. I felt like something else. Something sharper. A voice from the bar stool beside me broke the silence. Rough night. I turned. It was a man maybe mid-50s, salt and pepper beard, hands calloused from work that didn't happen in an office. His tie was loosened, his face lined with exhaustion. You could say that, I replied. He chuckled. Only thing worse than being dumped is being dumped in public. I froze, glass halfway to my lips. How did you? He shrugged. Buddy, I was at that party. Caterer on call. Hard not to notice when a woman serves her husband papers like it's a damn toast. He leaned closer. Cold move. But I'll tell you this, people who climb like that, they always leave cracks behind. You just have to know where to press. Cracks. The word sat in my mind like a key sliding into a lock. I left the bar after that, the man's words echoing behind me. Back in my truck, parked beneath the skeletal arms of a street lamp, I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the old folder. Inside were copies of every major loan I'd co-signed, every contract I'd guaranteed. Dates, signatures, balances. I'd kept them not out of paranoia, but habit. Record keeping was second nature to me. Now, it felt prophetic. As I flipped through the pages, a cold calm settled in my chest. Veronica thought she had staged the final act. But all she'd done was hand me motive and opportunity. Revenge isn't rage. Rage is sloppy. Revenge is arithmetic. And I already had the numbers. The morning after the party, Veronica posted pictures online. A flawless image, her in a tailored crimson suit, glass of champagne in hand, the caption reading, "The start of a new chapter. Independence. Growth. Success." Hundreds of likes. Congratulations from colleagues. Comments praising her bravery. Not a single mention of the man who had co-signed every loan that made that champagne sparkle. It was the perfect facade. Polished. Untouchable. But facades only hold as long as the scaffolding stands. And I was the scaffolding. That Monday, I made my first move. Small. Surgical. I logged into the professional wardrobe credit account, the one she used to keep herself dressed like a queen before juries. $17,800 balance, still sitting on my credit backbone. With a few clicks, I froze the card. Not cancelled, frozen. Enough to raise questions when she reached for it at a boutique. Enough to embarrass her when a sales clerk shook their head. Then I called the insurance carrier. Professional liability insurance, critical for any attorney, mandatory for someone with her caseload. I didn't cancel it, not yet. But I requested the policy details, confirmed that the account still ran through my authorization. A subtle reminder to myself, one phone call, and she'd be practicing law naked, exposed to malpractice suits. Lastly, the lease. That sleek downtown office with glass walls and sweeping city views wasn't hers, it was ours, under a joint guarantee. I scheduled a meeting with the property manager. I didn't threaten, didn't withdraw. I simply asked for a copy of the most recent agreement. He didn't ask why. Paperwork was paperwork. By noon, I had the documents spread across my own office desk. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even rushed. I was precise. Because revenge, done properly, is incremental. Each step calculated to destabilize, to remind her that freedom was an illusion. That evening, Veronica called. Not to ask where I was. Not to check if I was okay. She called because something had gone wrong. "Lucas," she said, voice tight, professional veneer cracking. "Did you touch the Nordstrom account? My card was declined today." I let silence hang for 3 beats before answering. "Yes. I froze it." "You froze it? Why? You know that card is for my our," I corrected. My voice was calm, steady. "It's in both our names. My credit is the backbone of that account. So yes, I froze it." She inhaled sharply. "This is childish. You can't just." "I can," I said, cutting her off. "And that's the part you seem to forget. You think you've outgrown me, Veronica. But everything you stand on, every billable hour, every courtroom outfit, every conference trip, it all traces back to my signature." For the first time in years, she was silent. Then, finally, "If you think you can control me with money." "Not control," I interrupted again. "Remind." Another pause. I could almost hear her jaw clenching on the other end. "Enjoy your independence, Veronica," I said quietly. "But don't forget who built the floor under your heels. Floors can collapse." I hung up before she could reply. That night, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was the shift. The first tremor before an earthquake. She had tried to humiliate me publicly. I would dismantle her privately. Brick by brick, loan by loan, until she realized that walking away from me wasn't just betrayal, it was self-destruction. And the best part? I wasn't doing anything illegal. No theatrics. No threats. Just math. And math, unlike love, doesn't lie. By Thursday, the cracks began to show. At first, they were small, almost imperceptible. A ripple in the surface of her carefully curated image. But ripples become waves when you've built your empire on borrowed foundations. The first crack came in her office. One of her junior associates, a nervous kid named Aaron, called to inform me, by mistake, that the firm's rent payment hadn't cleared. He thought he was dialing the property manager, but somehow he got me instead. Mr. Foster. Sorry, I thought. I was just trying to confirm if the payment issue got resolved." His voice trailed off when he realized who he was talking to. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Tell Veronica I'll look into it." The payment issue wasn't an accident. I had delayed the automatic transfer by 48 hours. Not enough to default, not enough to trigger penalties, just enough to make the office manager uncomfortable, to raise whispers in the hall. Lawyers thrive on confidence. The appearance of instability is poison. The second crack came at a conference. Veronica had flown to Chicago to attend a litigation summit. Normally, she'd glide into those events like royalty, designer suit, head held high, card ready for the post-panel dinners. But that weekend, her wardrobe account remained frozen. She was forced to wear a dress she'd already been photographed in twice before. To most, it was nothing. But in her circles, image mattered. Colleagues noticed. One woman even joked, "Recycling outfits, Veronica? Didn't peg you as the practical type." I knew that line would cut deeper than any blade. The third crack came with the insurance carrier. She received a formal notice. Her liability policy was under review because the guarantor, me, had requested account reassessment. Again, I didn't cancel anything. I didn't need to. A simple inquiry was enough to put a spotlight on her file. Lawyers live and die by insurance. Even the whiff of disruption is enough to rattle them. Veronica called me that night, fury thinly veiled under composure. "Lucas," she said, voice low, controlled. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but if you believe you can sabotage me—" "I'm not sabotaging you," I interrupted smoothly. "I'm reviewing what I'm financially responsible for. That's called due diligence." "You're trying to humiliate me." "No," I said. "That was your game. At the cocktail party. Remember?" Silence. Then, in a voice quieter than I expected, "People are starting to ask questions." Exactly what I wanted to hear. Confidence is currency in her world. And little by little, I was devaluing it. Her empire still stood, glass walls glittering downtown, but the foundation was trembling. I wasn't burning it down in one dramatic blaze, that would have been too merciful. No, I was loosening the screws, one by one, until the whole structure would collapse under its own weight. And the beauty of it. Nobody could see my hand in it. To her colleagues, to her clients, it looked like Veronica Foster was simply slipping. Careless. Overextended. Cracks in her perfect armor. She thought divorcing me would free her. Instead, it was binding her tighter. Because when a woman builds her empire on someone else's credit, she doesn't get to call herself independent. She gets to call herself vulnerable. And I was just getting started. By October, Veronica's shine had dulled. Not enough for the outside world to declare her finished, but enough that people in her orbit began to sense weakness. And in law, weakness draws blood faster than any verdict. It began with the partners. At networking events, they still smiled at her, still shook her hand, but the conversations didn't linger. They drifted toward newer faces, safer bets. Veronica's name stopped appearing at the top of panel invites. At one gala, I watched from a distance as she circled the room, champagne glass in hand, smile just a little too wide, eyes darting for acknowledgement. The very same room that once leaned toward her now tilted away. Law is a business of perception. The moment they smell instability, they hedge. Then came the clients. A mid-sized tech company pulled their contract, citing strategic realignment. Translation: they didn't trust her to handle their litigation. Another client, a family-owned business, stalled payments, claiming they were reassessing their budget. I knew the truth. They'd heard whispers. Rumors that Veronica was stretched thin. Rumors seeded by subtle delays, quiet policy reviews, small embarrassments no lawyer of her standing should endure. At home, or what used to be home, she found herself increasingly alone. Friends she once hosted for rooftop drinks grew scarce. Text messages went unanswered. The brunch group she flaunted on social media posted pictures without her. One caption read, "Strong women lift each other up." She wasn't tagged. I wasn't surprised. People don't want to stand next to a crumbling statue, they're afraid of the debris. One night, she called me again. No fury this time. Just exhaustion. "Lucas," she said softly, "I don't know what you're trying to prove." I let her words hang, let the silence stretch until she spoke again. "You've made your point. I shouldn't have embarrassed you at the party. It was cruel. But this isn't necessary. You're hurting me more than you realize." Her voice cracked on that last word. For a second, the ironclad Veronica Foster was gone. In her place was the woman from 8 years ago, the one at my kitchen table, eyes burning with desperation and ambition, asking me to believe in her. And for the briefest flicker, I almost softened. But then I remembered the laughter at the cocktail party. The applause. The word transitional. My grip on the phone tightened. "No, Veronica. I'm not hurting you more than I realize. I'm hurting you exactly as much as I intend to." A silence followed. Heavy. Weighted. Finally, she whispered, "You won't stop until I have nothing, will you?" I didn't answer. Some truths don't need words. That night, I wrote another entry in my ledger. Not financial this time. Personal. Because revenge isn't just about numbers. It's about isolation. And the cruelest revenge isn't taking someone's empire, it's making sure no one is there to help them rebuild it. And with every crack, every rumor, every silence from her so-called friends, Veronica Foster was learning what it meant to be truly alone. By November, The facade Veronica had polished so carefully finally began to fracture in ways no sharp smile or expensive dress could disguise. Her empire wasn't crumbling, it was collapsing. And I had set every crack in motion. It started with the banks. The notice from First Charlotte Financial arrived on a Tuesday morning, stamped urgent. Without my guarantee, they demanded immediate collateral or repayment of the $67,000 business loan. 30 days. That was it. I knew she didn't have it. Her accounts had been leveraged for appearances, suits, galas, conference trips. She'd lived like a partner before she'd earned the title. Credit had filled the gaps, and my signature had made the lenders look away. Now, the banks weren't looking away anymore. Then came the equipment financing company. The computers, servers, and legal research software that formed the backbone of her practice were no longer hers. They demanded payment in full, $42,000, or repossession. Imagine the humiliation, a law office stripped bare, like a staged house losing its furniture once the open house ends. But the final blow came in the form of insurance. Professional liability insurance wasn't just a formality, it was oxygen. No insurance, no license to practice. The cancellation letter was clinical, almost cruel in its efficiency. Effective immediately, your coverage has been revoked due to failure of guarantee. It didn't matter how brilliant her arguments were, how many hours she'd spent preparing briefs. Without coverage, Veronica Foster was dead in the water. That Friday afternoon, she showed up at my office. My assistant buzzed me. "Mr. Foster, your ex-wife is here. She insists." I allowed it. I wanted to see the wreckage up close. She walked in, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Her hair was unstyled, her eyes red-rimmed, her clothes plain. Not the Veronica who once commanded a room. This was a woman stripped of armor. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling. "Please. My practice is gone if you don't reverse this. Clients are calling, demanding answers. I can't even access my case law database. I have briefs due, deadlines. Her hands shook as she spoke. She wasn't arguing like a lawyer. She was begging like a debtor. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "That sounds unfortunate. Don't do this. Please. I know I hurt you. I humiliated you. I regret it every day. But you can't," her voice cracked. "You can't take everything from me." I let her words hang, let her drown in the silence between us. "Finally," I said, "you already took everything from me, Veronica. My credit, my security, my reputation in the bank's eyes. And then you took my dignity in front of your colleagues. I'm just balancing the books." She dropped into the chair across from me, tears spilling freely now. "What do you want?" she whispered. I pulled open a drawer and slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of every guarantee, every loan, every financial chain she had bound me with over the years. "I want you to look at this," I said. "Every dollar you borrowed on my name. Every signature I gave so you could climb. And then I want you to understand, this was never your empire. It was mine. You were just living on borrowed ground." Her hands hovered over the folder but didn't touch it. Her eyes flickered with recognition, with shame, with something that looked dangerously close to defeat. And in that moment, I realized she finally understood the truth. I wasn't tearing down her empire. I was simply removing the foundation she'd built it on. And when the foundation goes, the whole structure falls. That was the day Veronica Foster's career collapsed. The following week, the confrontation I'd been expecting finally came. Not in court, not in some polished conference room, but in the fragile quiet of my office. Veronica came unannounced again, but this time she wasn't disheveled. She'd forced herself back into a suit, navy, pressed, though the fabric strained against her exhaustion. Her makeup was applied with care, but her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights behind them. She closed the door behind her without asking. "We need to talk." Her voice carried a tone I recognized. Not the pleading from last time, not the arrogance from the cocktail party. This was the lawyer's voice. Controlled, clipped, deliberate. She was bracing for a fight. I gestured to the chair. "By all means." She sat but didn't relax. "If you continue this campaign, I will have no choice but to take you to court. Breach of marital agreement, intentional interference with my business relationships, financial sabotage. I'll file motions, injunctions, whatever it takes. She was trying to sound powerful, but her hands betrayed her, fingers tapping against a briefcase like a metronome of panic. I smiled faintly. You've forgotten something, Veronica. You filed for divorce. Publicly. Loudly. You made it clear to everyone, colleagues, clients, even the bar association, that our partnership is over. Those guarantees. Those were based on our marriage. Change of circumstances clauses give me every right to withdraw. Ask James Wright. He's already confirmed it. Her composure faltered. She hadn't expected me to invoke James by name. She shifted tactics. Even so, this is vindictive. You're not just hurting me, you're hurting innocent clients. Families. Businesses. People who trusted me. Correction, I said calmly. People who trusted the illusion you sold them. An illusion I financed. You told them you were independent. Self-made. But the truth. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a razor's edge. You were a house of cards. And I was the table you stacked yourself on. You kicked the table. Don't look shocked that the cards fell. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes wavered. For the first time, she didn't have a clean rebuttal. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke, her tone lower, almost breaking. What do you want, Lucas? Do you want me to admit it? To tell everyone I built my career on your back? I didn't blink. Yes. Because that's the truth. And truth has a way of restoring balance. Her shoulders sagged as if the weight of that demand crushed her more than the lawsuits, more than the debt. For a woman who'd built her entire identity on being formidable, public admission of dependence wasn't just defeat, it was annihilation. She whispered, almost to herself, that would destroy me. I leaned back in my chair. No, Veronica. I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself the moment you thought the foundation didn't matter. She sat there, eyes glistening, breathing shallow, and I realized she wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting reality. And reality was a battle she couldn't win. For once, Veronica Foster had no argument, no plan, no exit strategy. Just silence. And in that silence, I tasted victory, not loud, not triumphant, but cold and absolute. By December, it wasn't just her balance sheet that had collapsed. It was her reputation, the very currency she once traded more ruthlessly than cash. It started small, like hairline fractures in glass. A missed filing deadline here. A client whispering about unreturned calls there. In law, whispers spread faster than verdicts. At the courthouse, I overheard them myself, clerks, associates, even opposing counsel. Did you hear about Foster? They say her malpractice insurance lapsed. Word is, she can't even keep the lights on. Once, people said her name with envy. Now, they said it with pity, or worse, schadenfreude. Her own staff began peeling away. Paralegals sent resumes to rival firms. Her secretary gave notice. Even her junior associate, the one she'd boasted about mentoring, jumped ship, taking 2 clients with him. I hadn't bribed them, hadn't interfered. All I'd done was let gravity pull her down. But in the circles we moved in, perception was everything. Once people sensed she was sinking, they scattered like rats from a listing ship. The humiliation reached its crescendo at the Bar Association's holiday gala. She showed up late, wearing a dress that looked borrowed rather than bought, her jewelry subdued. Gone was the woman who once swept into rooms like a storm. She hovered at the edges now, trying to look unbothered while the conversations pivoted just as she approached. I was there, too. Not to gloat, at least, not openly. I had been invited on my own merits. I spoke with colleagues, laughed lightly, sipped my drink. I didn't have to say a word about her. My very presence was enough. And then it happened. One of the senior partners from Henderson & Lowe, a man she had once mocked as old money deadweight, turned to her in front of a small group and asked, with genuine confusion, Veronica, I thought your firm was expanding? Rumor is you've lost, what, half your clients? The silence that followed was brutal. She stammered, tried to spin it, but her voice cracked under the weight of all those eyes. The woman who once prided herself on sharp comebacks could only muster a weak, "Don't believe everything you hear." But the damage was done. The cracks in her facade had become visible to everyone. That night, I watched her leave the gala early, her heels clicking too fast against marble, her back stiff with wounded pride. And I realized something important. It wasn't the loss of money or clients that was killing Veronica. It was the loss of control over the narrative. For a woman who built her empire on perception, having the story turned against her was the cruelest cut of all. By January, the storm that had ruined Veronica's professional life began spilling into her personal one. If her firm's collapse was the public scandal, her private unraveling was the quiet tragedy that followed. Her apartment was the first to go. I knew because I received the notice too. She had listed me as her emergency guarantor years ago when the lease was signed. The management company wanted 3 months' rent, or eviction proceedings would begin. She had traded the safety of a home for cocktail dresses and business trips, and now the debt collector's knock was louder than any applause she once drew. Then came the car repossession. Her BMW, the one she had paraded through Charlotte streets like a trophy, vanished from the firm's parking garage. Not stolen, seized. I happened to be driving past that same evening, and I caught sight of her, standing frozen, clutching her briefcase, staring at the empty spot where her luxury badge of status had once gleamed. Her phone was pressed to her ear. I could imagine the desperate call, pleading, bargaining, demanding, but the tow trucks don't take calls. And finally, the friends began to disappear. The same women who once toasted her ambition stopped answering her texts. The men who once flirted at fundraisers no longer returned calls. People avoided her not out of loyalty to me, but out of their own self-preservation. In our world, proximity to failure is a contagion. I watched from a distance as she sat alone at a cafe where we had once gone together. Same corner table. Same cappuccino order. But no one came to join her. Her world, once filled with chatter, had gone silent. The next time she showed up at my office, she looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her face pale from lack of sleep. She wasn't Veronica Foster, commanding attorney. She was just Veronica, the woman underneath the armor, stripped bare. She didn't ask this time. She didn't threaten. She simply said, in a quiet, hoarse voice, "Lucas, I don't know how much more I can take." For a brief moment, something twisted in me. Pity. The faint echo of love for the girl I'd once believed in. But then I remembered the cocktail party. The smirk. The way she'd looked at me as if I were disposable, a starter husband. The pity evaporated. I folded my hands. Then maybe it's time you start learning how it feels to live without someone else holding up your world. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Not this time. She simply nodded, as though the weight of the truth was too heavy to fight anymore. Then she turned and left. That was the moment I realized something. I hadn't just broken Veronica's career. I had broken her image of herself. By February, there was only one thread left holding Veronica together, her standing with the Bar Association. She had lost her office, her staff, her clients, her home, and her car. But she clung to that last credential like a drowning swimmer clings to driftwood. If she could just keep her license, she could tell herself it wasn't over. But I knew better. The Bar Association doesn't care about excuses. It cares about optics. Missed deadlines, lapsed insurance, client complaints, all of it goes into the record. And with her enemies circling, those whispers I'd once heard in court began to crystallize into formal grievances. One client claimed she'd taken a retainer and failed to deliver services. Another said she'd abandoned their case after her staff walked out. Whether those claims were exaggerated didn't matter. They painted a picture, and the picture was damning. By the time the disciplinary committee summoned her, the outcome was already written. I wasn't there in the hearing room, but I didn't need to be. I heard from contacts afterward. They said she tried to argue, tried to spin the collapse as temporary setbacks. But her voice shook, her hands trembled, and the committee wasn't moved. The verdict, her license was suspended, pending further investigation. For a lawyer, that's not a punishment. That's an execution. That evening, I found her sitting on the steps outside the courthouse, staring at the ground. Her briefcase was beside her, but it looked almost laughable now, like a costume prop she'd forgotten to put away. When she saw me, she didn't sneer, didn't spit venom. She just looked hollow. "They took it," she whispered. "Everything. My name, my career. I'm nothing now." I stood there for a long moment, letting her words hang in the cold air. Then I said quietly, "No, Veronica. You're not nothing. You're just, finally, without all the things you stole to make yourself look like something." Her face crumpled, not in rage, but in despair. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. She didn't have the strength left to pretend. She bowed her head, and for the first time since I'd met her, Veronica Foster looked like what she truly was, a woman broken by her own ambition, crushed under the weight of the lies she had built her world on. And in that moment, I knew the revenge was complete. Not because I had destroyed her, but because I had simply let her destroy herself. When the dust settled, there was no victory parade. No applause. No champagne corks echoing the way hers had at that damned cocktail party. There was only quiet. Veronica had disappeared from the circles we once shared. No more whispered mentions at court. No sightings at galas. The once rising star of Charlotte's legal scene was gone, leaving only rumors in her wake. Some say she moved in with family. Others heard she's bartending somewhere outside the city. Maybe she left town altogether. Her name, once a weapon, had become a ghost. And me. I should have felt triumphant. I had watched her empire crumble, brick by brick. I had seen the arrogance drain from her eyes, replaced by tears. I had reduced her to silence, to shame, to absence. But the strange thing about revenge is this: it doesn't give back what was taken. The humiliation I'd endured at her firm's opening night? Still there, burned into my memory. The years of carrying her debts, of being dismissed as a stepping stone? Still carved into my pride. I had won. Yet, standing in my office one evening with nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights for company, I realized winning didn't feel like healing. One night, I found myself at the same cafe where I'd once seen her sit alone. I ordered a cappuccino, took the same corner table. For the first time, I let myself remember, not the predator she became, but the girl she had been when we were young. Bright-eyed, fierce, laughing too loud in law school libraries. The one who once leaned on me with genuine trust. Where had that girl gone? Had she ever been real, or had I only imagined her? I would never know. As I stirred my coffee, I finally understood. My revenge hadn't been about destroying her. It had been about reclaiming myself. Showing her, and maybe myself, that I hadn't been disposable. That I had mattered. And in that, I had succeeded. But peace. Peace was still a long way off. That night, I walked out of the cafe into the February chill, hands in my pockets, and let the city swallow me whole. Behind me, Veronica Foster was nothing more than a shadow. Ahead of me, there was only the quiet road forward. And for the first time in years, it was mine alone. Months passed. Spring crept into Charlotte with dogwoods blooming along the streets, the city moving forward as if Veronica Foster had never existed. But shadows have a way of returning. It was late April when the knock came at my door. Not the knock of a courier, not the polite tap of a neighbor. A hesitant knock, soft, uneven, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there at all. When I opened it, she was standing in the hallway. Veronica. But not the Veronica I remembered. No armor, no pretense, no storm of perfume and power. Just a woman in a thrift coat, hair tied back, eyes ringed with exhaustion. She looked older, as if the collapse had stolen years she could never reclaim. "Lucas," she said, voice thin. I didn't know where else to go. For a moment, the sight of her stirred something complicated in me. Memories of laughter, ambition, betrayal, and vengeance tangled together in the silence between us. She shifted her weight. "I'm not here to fight. Not to beg either. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For all of it." The words hung heavy. I had waited years for them, dreamt of them, but now that they were real, they didn't taste as sweet as I'd imagined. I studied her face. Not the predator anymore. Not even the rival. Just a broken person, stripped of everything, searching for closure. I could have slammed the door. Could have twisted the knife with one final cruel line. But instead, I simply nodded once and said, "Goodbye, Veronica." Then I closed the door. On the other side, I heard her linger for a moment. A faint breath, like a sob caught in her throat. Then footsteps fading down the hall. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. That was the last time I ever saw her. Revenge hadn't given me joy. It hadn't given me peace. But it had given me freedom. And sometimes, that's enough. Summer arrived, long and heavy with Carolina heat. By then, Veronica was no longer a subject of conversation. Her name, once a fixture in barrooms and boardrooms, had evaporated from the city's gossip like smoke carried off by wind. But in the quiet absence she left behind, I found something I hadn't expected, the weight of freedom. Without the guarantees, without her debts, my finances were finally my own again. The banks looked at me as Lucas Foster, not Veronica's husband, not her co-signer, not her shield. Just me. It was liberating. And terrifying. For years, I had defined myself against her, first as the support behind her climb, then as the architect of her fall. Now, there was no her. Only me. And the question that gnawed at me in the stillness of my apartment was simple, sharp, and inescapable. Who am I when I'm not fighting Veronica? I threw myself into work. Took on new clients. Rebuilt my credit, line by line. Attended networking events not to haunt her memory but to stand on my own merit. People noticed. Some even whispered that I had weathered the storm with grace. If only they knew. But at night, when the city quieted, memories returned. Not of the battles, not of the courtroom whispers or the gala humiliations, but of small, mundane things. Her laugh in the mornings before coffee. The way she used to underline her law textbooks in 3 colors, obsessively neat. The two of us, back when everything felt possible. It wasn't longing. It wasn't regret. It was something harder to name, like staring at an old scar, remembering both the pain of the wound and the life you lived before it. One evening, I stood on my balcony, watching the skyline glow against the dusky sky. Charlotte moved forward. So did I. Veronica was gone. My revenge was complete. And in its wake, I finally saw the truth. Revenge doesn't end with destruction. It ends with silence. And silence, though heavy, is the first step toward freedom. That was the true ending of Veronica Foster. Not in flames, not in scandal, just in absence. And for me, the true beginning.